at 7 a.m. September 12, 2025. During a routine maritime patrol in the East China Sea, Japan's radar station on Yonaguni Island picked up something unusual. On the ANTPS-80G AIDR system, a joint US-Japan multi-mission radar, several large echoes appeared. The reflections were strong, matching the signature of major warships. The contacts were moving southwest, about 180 nautical miles from the Senkaku Islands, making 20 knots. They were off all civilian routes. Initial analysis confirmed not commercial traffic. At the same time, 2 US Navy destroyers and 1 Royal Navy ship operated in international waters south of the Taiwan Strait, about 150 nautical miles off China's coast. No irregular activity had been reported. But one day earlier, at Jiangnan Shipyard, the largest and most advanced warship in China's history had left port, its first voyage since launch. A ship seen as the symbol of Beijing's ambition to challenge the US Navy. Far to the south, in the Philippine Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 and her carrier strike group from the US 7th Fleet continued their routine patrol. Their mission: protect the sea lanes linking the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Those routes carry trade from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia to the world. The task force operated about 200 nautical miles east of Taiwan, a deep, open stretch of sea that connects directly to the Taiwan Strait. Over $5 trillion in global trade passes through here every year. On board, everything ran with precision and discipline, a standard the US Navy has upheld for generations. The mission followed 3 principles: freedom of navigation, transparency of intent, professional conduct of a regular Navy. This discipline stood in contrast to the maritime militias working the gray zone between peace and conflict, where civilian and military roles blur under ambition. On Lincoln's flight deck, F-35Cs, FA-18 Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, and E-2D Hawkeyes stood ready, maintaining freedom of navigation and America's deterrent presence across the Western Pacific. At 7:08 a.m., data synchronized instantly through Link 16 from Japan's urgent report, shared with all units in the region. A contact displacing over 80,000 tons moved southwest, less than 300 nautical miles from the Taiwan Strait. On the USS Higgins, patrolling south of the Taiwan Strait, the tactical officer ordered a 20-degree turn north. The ship kept a safe distance and switched the AN Spy-1DV to active scan. To the southeast, HMS Richmond increased speed and took the formation's right flank. Inside the Higgins Combat Information Center, dim blue light washed over operators and analysts. They spoke in short, calm sentences. No panic. All attention on the target's movement. The Higgins carried 90 VLS cells, enough firepower to destroy any hostile vessel in range. The Spy-1D, among the world's most advanced naval sensors, displayed the target with high clarity. Surface details were visible. At current speed, the Chinese carrier group would enter weapons range in about 30 minutes. On the tactical display, one large return moved steadily, flanked by 2 smaller echoes. Preliminary analysis identified the formation as 1 aircraft carrier, 1 large destroyer, and 1 destroyer. From Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, a P-8A Poseidon launched west to collect electronic and visual intelligence. Its EO/IR suite and AN APS-154 sensors provided real-time confirmation. The compiled data matched. Fujian led the formation, escorted by Type 052 C Jinan and Type 956 E Hangzhou. All 3 headed directly toward the Taiwan Strait centerline. On the 7th Fleet tactical board, the threat level rose to high threat. China was not a weak opponent. Beijing had built a coastal missile zone under its A2AD strategy. This zone could threaten forces at sea. At Longtian, Fujian Province, a People's Liberation Army Rocket Force unit deployed mobile DF-26D launchers. The system is often called a carrier killer. It was publicly displayed on September 3, 2025. DF-26D range is about 2,500 to 3,100 miles. Reported mid-course speed can reach Mach 10. It is designed to strike maritime targets at long standoff. As the confrontation escalated, the People's Liberation Army designated her as a priority target. Beijing employed the DF-26D as a strategic deterrent. Its targeting relied on Beidou 3 satellites, coastal radar stations, and sensors aboard escort ships. Together, these systems formed an integrated targeting network. State media praised DF-26D as a decisive weapon. International analysts warned it is a strong deterrent, but hitting a moving carrier in real combat remains highly uncertain. The United States did not stand idle. The carrier group fielded Aegis BMD with long-range radar and SM-3, SM-6 interceptors. EA-18G Growlers applied electronic attack to degrade enemy sensing and targeting. P-8S and E-2DS provided early warning. These measures did not make DF-26D harmless. Their goal was to blind adversary targeting, corrupt track data, and, if possible, intercept warheads in flight. In short, DF-26D was a strategic threat, not a guaranteed kill. At 7:35 a.m., the captain ordered an assessment of the Chinese group's intent. Analysis showed that at current speed and course, the formation would enter engagement range within 25 minutes. Recommendation: raise to full alert. The captain replied with calm confidence.
We'll see how far they go before crossing the point of no return.
At the same time in Taipei, Taiwan's Air Force Joint Operations Center raised surveillance to Level 2. 2 F-16V squadrons on quick reaction alert from Hualien took off, heading into the southwest ADIZ to reinforce coverage. Data from Japan, the United States, and Taiwan merged on a single tactical map. A Chinese carrier strike group advanced in combat formation toward the Taiwan Strait centerline. The strait was crowded. Within 50 nautical miles of the centerline, more than 200 commercial ships moved through, container vessels, bulk carriers, and LNG tankers, each carrying cargo of strategic value. Among them, a Japanese car carrier packed with automotive parts and finished vehicles for East Asia's supply chain. Nearby, a US-flagged freighter transported semiconductor equipment and aerospace components. If Beijing intended to turn these international waters into a controlled zone, the region's entire logistics network would be at risk. To do that, they would first have to defeat the US Navy. At 7:45 a.m., aboard the Higgins, the Cooperative Engagement Capability System transmitted threat data to every ship in the formation. The Lincoln, displacing about 100,000 tons, full load, and carrying 90 aircraft, shifted to high alert. Escort ships, the USS Philippine Sea, USS Spruance, and USS Chaffee, changed position, forming a defensive ring around the carrier. At 7:50 a.m., the tactical picture shifted from concern to danger. An E-2D Hawkeye, flying at 25,000 feet, extended the radar net with a detection range of at least 300 nautical miles. It picked up multiple aircraft launching from Fujian, radar-confirmed J-15T, J-35, and KJ-600 fighters climbing south. At 7:55 a.m., sonar teams on USS Higgins, with MH-60R Seahawk support, detected an underwater contact 100 nautical miles north. Automated analysis from the AN/SQQ-89V-15 system matched the acoustic signature of a Type 093 A-Shang II-class nuclear-powered submarine. Data from sonar, radar, and electronic intelligence merged into a single picture. The formation was clear: Fujian, the Type 052 C Jinan, the Type 956 E Hangzhou, and one Type 093A submarine. Operational weaknesses were already visible. Not every destroyer in the screen provided integrated long-range air defense. Jinan provided long-range coverage. Hangzhou, a Russian-bought Type 956E, stayed in the medium band despite upgrades. Fujian's EMALS could launch heavy jets. Sortie flow and integration were still maturing. The Type 093A ran 15 to 20 decibels louder than Virginia-class subs, making it easy prey for the Lincoln's layered sonar network. On paper, it was China's strongest formation. In reality, it was a show of force with limited endurance. Against a fleet that dominated deep waters and coordination speed, its advantage vanished. China had chosen the wrong time and place to test its fleet. Beneath the sleek hulls, technical limits persisted. Fujian displaced about 80,000 tons, full load, far less than US nuclear supercarriers. Less displacement meant less fuel, fewer weapons, and shorter endurance. Unlike Ford-class carriers, the Fujian used steam turbines, relying on supply ships for fuel and logistics. It couldn't sustain long operations far from home. Its EMALS launch system had only 3 catapults, one fewer than the Ford class. Launch rates dropped under high tempo. Only 2 elevators linked hangar and flight deck, creating bottlenecks during surge operations. Old hydraulic arresting gear increased maintenance and reduced reliability on long campaigns. The carrier air wing was incomplete, roughly half the size of a Ford-class air wing. It lacked a dedicated electronic attack platform like the EA-18G Growler. Fujian's AESA radars were modern but less flexible than US multi-band DVR systems, struggling to track many targets at once. All these factors made China's deterrent more spectacle than strength, impressive to watch, but indecisive against an opponent controlling deep water with superior reconnaissance and coordination. An FA-18E Super Hornet climbed to 15,000 feet. Its AN/APG-79 AESA scanned far ahead, locking targets at long range. The F-35C Lightning II served as a key sensor. Low observability made it a mobile sensor and fusion node. It penetrated enemy airspace and collected AESA, EO, and ESM data. It sent coordinates and imagery to the formation via MADL and Link 16. When F-35Cs operated, strike chains were defined: shooters, suppressors, priority targets. From Fujian's deck, J-35s, J-15Ts, and KJ-600 aircraft launched. The J-35 is a new stealth fighter with an RCS near 0.1 square meters, smaller than a J-15T but far larger than an F-35C's 0.0015 square meters. The J-15T, an upgraded Su-33 design, still suffers from a heavy airframe, high fuel burn, and limited range. The KJ-600 provides AEW with a phased array radar. Its scan range and emitter stability do not match the AN/APY-9 on an E-2D. New deck operations imposed limits. Some aircraft had to launch with reduced fuel or weapons to clear the deck safely. That lowered climb performance and shortened on-station time. By contrast, FA-18S launched at full combat weight with full fuel and ordnance. They were ready without payload compromise. Each FA-18 shared data via Link 16. One aircraft detected a target. The whole formation saw it. The F-35C added a stealth sensor layer, detecting approaches before a KJ-600 or shipboard radar could. The USS Abraham Lincoln deployed a tactical wall formation, combining air defense and strike functions refined over decades of carrier air integration. 3 altitude bands structured the formation: high observation at about 35,000 feet, E-2D, EA-18G, and F-35C. Middle attack at about 25,000 feet, FA-18 and F-35C. Low protection at about 2,000 feet, MH-60R Seahawk. The 3 layers created overlapping engagement zones. Radars, sensors, and weapons cross-covered each other. No approach could transit without detection or a target lock. F-35C and Super Hornets held primary attack roles. EA-18G and E-2D provided electronic shielding and long-range warning. By contrast, the Chinese formation still relied heavily on voice communications and visual lookout. The data links of the People's Liberation Army Navy and the People's Liberation Army Navy Air Force were stable only within about 4354 nautical miles. Full encryption and interoperability between J-35 and J-15T variants remained incomplete. Under heavy jamming, pilots sometimes heard radio and noise together. chaotic audio like HF-era screeching from Cold War transmissions. An RC-135V rivet joint provided critical alint. The aircraft, based on a Boeing 707 airframe, had been orbiting for 6 hours to collect Chinese emissions. Analysts detected a sudden spike in squadron communications. After minutes of decoding, they confirmed the order.
Prepare to close to short range. Await command.
In other words, Chinese fighters were preparing to close on the US formation to show force. The report went immediately to the 7th Fleet. A short message flashed on the CIC screen.
Opposing aircraft closing on the formation. High provocation likelihood.
At 8:05 a.m., Higgins' defenses ran with mechanical precision. The AN, Spy 1DV, delivered very high-resolution returns at ranges of hundreds of nautical miles. It updated in real time. Its scan remained in active mode. Fire solutions were calculated and updated continuously. Weapons could be employed if required. At 8:10 a.m., the Chinese Carrier Strike Group crossed the threshold most navies treat as cause for immediate response. On the Type 052C Jinan, the Type 346 phased array radar left search mode and locked onto the USS Higgins. That act was the equivalent of pulling a major gun's firing pin. The signal was clear. The opponent stood ready to fire on command. Inside the USS Higgins Combat Information Center, response measures launched immediately. Discipline held. Decades of training kept the crew steady. China's tactic relied on US restraint to offset its own aggression. That assumption was flawed. Restraint is not inability. The Higgins fire control radars remained on standby. 90 VLS cells, loaded with SM-6 and SM-2, stood at combat readiness. Escorts and the carrier exchanged data, adjusted defensive positions, and prepared engagement options. Fire plans updated by the second. The Chinese group sat under a multi-azimuth threat. Survival probability was near zero if conflict began. Target illumination lasted 30 seconds. Long enough for China to signal capability and intent, but short of forcing an American defensive shot. This was controlled escalation. It was also a grave miscalculation of opponent and timing. The USS Higgins combat team logged every detail. Time, bearing, and signal characteristics were recorded. Data preserved for legal and tactical use if the standoff escalated. Although the Chinese ship ceased radar illumination, tension remained. At nearly 40,000 feet, 2 J-35 fighters broke formation and accelerated toward the US group. Ahead of them, a US Navy F-35C Lightning II had tracked their movement for some time. The F-35C's integrated sensor suite reconstructed the Chinese flight paths in real time. AN APG-81, AN AAQ-37DAS, and EOTS combined their data. Sensor fusion built the picture. Data was then transmitted instantly over Link 16 to the formation. On the pilot's helmet display, 2 red symbols flashed. AIM-120D AMRAAM could leave the rail. Radio voice cut in.
Target lock confirmed. Hold fire.
An unwritten rule in air encounters: deter. Do not start a war. The F-35C gained advantage through detection, analysis, and control. It did not rely on missile firing to dominate. China tried to close from multiple directions. Each time an EA-18G Growler increased jamming, J-15T radars and navigation systems degraded. Pilots had to maneuver more. Afterburners lit repeatedly. Fuel burn doubled. After about 25 minutes, half the Chinese fighters called bingo fuel. They had only enough fuel to return to the carrier. Fujian used emails catapults, but it still could not sustain long air operations like the US Navy. Limits, reload rate, deck area, and logistics at sea. In the air, one J-15 broke from formation and made a fast, close pass to intimidate an FA-18. The US pilot, a Top Gun graduate, reacted Top Gun style. He inverted and pulled to the J-15's 6 o'clock. In 3 seconds, he had a perfect firing solution. The helmet display showed the enemy engine hot on the IR band. One trigger pull would send an AIM-9X Sidewinder. He did not fire. Discipline held. A silent, unmistakable warning.
We see you. If we chose to, you would disappear. Sonar contact, bearing 159 degrees, range 7.4 nautical miles, high propeller noise, initial assessment, probable type 093A.
The Chinese submarine captain either did not notice or chose to ignore the warning. A Virginia-class SSN, using its ANBQQ-10 sonar suite, had tracked the submarine's position for more than an hour. Acoustic signature recorded, coordinates fixed to the meter. If the situation crossed the threshold, the submarine would have only seconds to react. An MH-60R could launch a torpedo within those seconds. The submarine would become a target in the open ocean. The tactical picture became a textbook example of mistakes in naval operations. The Chinese force had boxed itself in. Carrier to the south, US and Royal Navy destroyers to the southeast, 2 Taiwanese F-16Vs to the east, the 7th Fleet to the northeast. If shots were fired, no unit would survive more than 5 minutes. The US Navy stood ready to demonstrate that outcome. At 9:15 a.m., the USS Abraham Lincoln launched its full naval air power, 48 aircraft, the largest sortie in the region this year. The strike package included F-35C Lightning IIs, FA-18 Super Hornets loaded with live ordnance, EA-18G Growlers carrying jamming suites powerful enough to cripple a city's electronic grid, and E-2D Hawkeyes controlling the electronic high ground. Within minutes, US aircraft gained full dominance over the battlespace. At altitudes above 30,000 feet, the Growlers began their electronic storm. ALQ-99 pods transmitted at full power, blanketing nearly 100 nautical miles in electromagnetic interference. Enemy radar screens turned to snow. Phantom echoes flickered and vanished. Data links broke sync. Pilots were forced to rely on visual spotting, a desperate act in modern air combat. Fujian's air defense picture collapsed into chaos. Controllers couldn't tell which blips were real and which were ghosts. Beneath the surface, a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine that had shadowed the Chinese formation began to move. At 9:45 a.m., the submarine surfaced only 6 nautical miles from the carrier Fujian, close enough for visual confirmation. The effect was psychological and immediate. A submarine surfacing at that range meant the entire Chinese anti-submarine screen, helicopters, sonobuoys, and hull sonars, had failed to detect a 7,900-ton US hunter killer. If this had been wartime, Fujian would already be out of action. The surfacing was deliberate, a show of presence. The black hull rose through the water, sunlight flashing across the spray. Observers on Fujian's deck photographed and reported the event. After roughly 90 seconds, the submarine submerged again, leaving a wordless message: "We control the deep." In the air, US fighters performed close combat maneuvers. Chinese J-35 pilots, launching from EMALS catapults with reduced fuel and payload, were at a disadvantage. Each encounter ended the same way: US fighters in firing position, Chinese fighters retreating, burning what little fuel remained. One by one, the Chinese aircraft left the battlespace, returning to Fujian nearly empty. Their average sortie lasted just over 40 minutes, almost half the endurance of US Navy standards. Some triggered the bingo fuel warning, signaling only enough fuel to reach the carrier. On the Fujian's flight deck, technicians scrambled to prepare for emergency recoveries. Above, the Western Pacific skies stayed under the control of F-35Cs and Super Hornets. At 10 a.m., the Fujian carrier strike group began to withdraw. Beijing's official statement declared the operation had completed the sea trials of the new carrier, but military analysts understood the real intent: a show of naval strength and a warning to Taiwan, which China calls its historic mission. The outcome told a different story. The show of force became a live demonstration of US naval superiority in joint operations, information warfare, and strategic deterrence. Fujian left the area in silence, carrying radar, sonar, and jamming data its crew had never seen before. On the map, the waters around Taiwan remained under the watch of US carrier strike groups, a reminder to Beijing that Taiwan is not just a political flashpoint, but a strategic link in Washington's defense architecture across the Western Pacific.